Hello and welcome to the Genuine Learning blog. My name is Melissa Galasso and I'm excited to be with you today to talk a little bit about data. So the AICPA has put out an exposure draft, and that exposure draft is aimed at helping CPAs as well as those in industry determine what it is to have data integrity. And so because big data and the focus on data, you can't go to a conference today without talking about how we have so much data and how do you comb through the data. One of the biggest things is how do we ensure that we have good data, reliable data, data that has integrity. And so the AICPA has started this project, and it's really looking at what criteria do we need to consider when we're evaluating whether the integrity of a set of data. So what this is looking to do is identify and establish criterion that would then be used to establish that the data is accurate and it has integrity. And it's going to provide those criterion in the concept of how we think about our data and our data analytics. So this is an exposure draft. The comments are due on July 9th. It was issued in May. And one of the things that they looked at is they wanted to sort of think about this from a security concept. And so it was developed by the AICPA's ASAC, or Assurance Service Executive Committee, and specifically their Trust Information Integrity Task Force. So many committees of the AICPA have these separate task force that are created and look for people with this type of specialization. And so their goal was to try to figure out, well, how do we know when we're looking at data that the data has integrity, and perhaps how can we even have CPAs get involved and be able to attest to a data set's integrity. And so a new service line basically can be formed here as we're looking at this. So a little bit of background here. The AICPA obviously has determined that there's a need to have certain criteria to be able to evaluate integrity of data, right? So we use data to make decisions, right? So whether we're in industry and we're trying to either assist senior management boards, but the goal here is how can we take a set of data and make decisions? When we talk about data, in reality, our goal is to take data and to turn it into information that's usable, right? So we take data, we turn it into dashboards so that we can interpret the information, we can make decisions. But we want to know that the data that we're basing these dashboards and these decisions on is valid and it has that integrity. And it can also then again be used by the CPA as an attestation standard or even a consulting engagement looking at the integrity of data. Now there's a lot of different things going on here. Obviously management is going to be responsible for the data, right? So at the end of the day, it's their data. So they are going to be responsible for the description of the set of data. It's management's responsibility to develop and present the description, and then also be able to then hire the CPA to come in and give that opinion. Now, how accurate data has to be, how much data integrity obviously varies. But if you're thinking about data in terms of census data for an actuarial report, obviously that data has good quality because it's sort of garbage in, garbage out. We're relying on that data to be accurate in order for us to be able to go through and make up our liability for our pensions, for example. So very important that we have an understanding of our data. So let's look at some definitions here that are included in the proposal. The first one is on what is data. So data is typically defined as facts and statistics collected about the characteristics or attributes of events and instances for reference or analysis, or when used as a basis for further calculation, reasoning, discussion, and informing data-based decision-making. So again, data in and of itself is not useful. We need to take that data and we need to transform it to be able to make decisions with it. We turn it into information. Now, a set of data is defined as a collection of data regarding events that share common characteristics or relationships. So there's a lot of different types of data. There's structured data, there's unstructured data. When we think about journal entries, for example, they could come in a very in a format that's very easy to use. It can come in a format that maybe not so easy to use. And so that is really what we're looking at as we go through this process. Now, the proposal basically sets up and says, okay, how do we know when we have integrity, right? So that's really what it's trying to look at. And it has two overall sort of overarching attributes. It's then going to develop criterion, but the attributes are a description of the set of data presented in accordance with the criteria in proposal is made available to the users. All right, so let's look at this. A description of the set of data. So we need to describe the data. And then the data has to be in accordance with the criteria that's in this proposal. So we're going to talk about what criteria that is, but there's 3 different pieces, and in there are multiple little subcategories. And it's made available to the users. So not only do we describe it, and we make sure that the descriptions are in accordance with the proposal here, but then it's made available to the users so they know how to use this. And then obviously the most important thing is after we have this description, the set of data is consistent with that description. And so when we're looking at this, we want to make sure that the data set is complete, for example. We want to make sure that nothing's been left out, that it's valid, accurate, complete, current, right? All of those things we think about when we think about our attestation engagements when we talk about quality. So let's talk a little bit about our attestation engagement. So there are different sections. There's 3 different sections, the attestation standards, the 100s, the 200s, and the 300s. So the 100s cover everything that's applicable to all. So whether you're doing an AUP, whether you're doing an examination, you would have to follow ATC 105. But there's also other ones depending on the type of service. So there's the 100s that does everything, but the 200s are based on the type of service. Is it an AUP? Is it going to be an examination? So most likely, a lot of times what we would expect here is that we would have an attestation standard, ATC 205, which would be an examination. So we'd want to give an opinion on the data. And so we would be able to follow that in order to say, okay, if this criterion is, you have that set, that we would be able to give an opinion on the integrity regarding that data. So let's look at the criterion that the AICPA developed. So the first one is pretty obvious. The description of the data, the set of data includes the intended use of the data. Why are we putting this together, right? So at the end of the day, these are the criterion that we're used to determine if we have integrity. And so obviously we need to know, why do we have this data? What is the purpose of this data? And so an example in the standard is the US Census data. Why do we collect the census data, right? So the US government every 10 years collects census data. We're actually coming up on a census year. Why do they go through this? Well, the purpose, the intended use of the data is actually how do they apportion the House of Representatives? That's one of the outcomes of this. And so they need to know where people are living. That's really the underlying intended use of the census data. And so the description has to include that intended use. In addition, it has to have a description that includes the population, the nature of each element, the source, what units of measurement are you using, the accuracy, correctness, or precision of your measurement. So we talk a lot about precision when we talk about statistics, but you can also use it in a variety other of descriptions. And then obviously it continues on to talk about the uncertainty or confidence level. Again, we talk about confidence levels when we talk about sampling. And so if you have these intervals inherent in the data set element and in the population, you would want to obviously describe that. The time period over which the data was measured, right? So is it over a period of time? Is it a point in time? You want to make sure that you're able to identify that. When was it collected? And then the factors in addition to the date or period of time that determine the inclusion or exclusion of the items. Once again, how do we know what should be in here and what should not be in here so that, again, if we wanted to do this attestation standard, we'd have that information. And then ultimately, some of the concluding items here is the description of the set of data is complete and accurate. The description of the set of data identifies any information that has not been included within the data, but is necessary to understand each data element and the population in a manner consistent with its intended purpose. The data description is provided with the set of data or is otherwise available. So again, we talk about that importance of it being available to the users. And then the data in the set is actually consistent. So the AICPA created these 6 criterion, and these 6 criterion would then be used in order to determine whether the set had integrity. And so the CPA would come in and they would look at these as the criteria, and then they would look at the description and they would ensure the description has all of these features, right? The description describes exactly what is going on. It talks about the period of time. And then we could say, okay, if the description is adequate, we can then determine, are we in accordance with the description? So we want to make sure that we have that both aspects in there. So this would be a new type of engagement that CPAs would be able to perform. It would also obviously help management understand the quality of their data. So that's it for today's blog. I hope that you found this useful. I hope that if this is something that is interesting to you, that you will comment. The AICPA always appreciates comment letters. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.